I'm going to go ahead and get started. So as I said, this is the Newborn Screening Family Perspectives, which is part of our Time for Genetics initiative. We are funded by HRSA. So this is our HRSA statement that we share where our funding comes from, Department of Health and Human Services. And you can refer to hrsa.gov for more information. I am Christy Weiss. I'm the projects manager for Mountain States and the lead here for Time for Genetics. And it is my pleasure to welcome you all. We have 28 clinics now as part of the Time for Genetics cohorts 1, 2, and 3. And you can see the little pins there all across our region. Just a reminder to you all, we are wrapping up newborn screening as a topic area with this presentation. For those that just joined us in cohort 3, I will be asking you for some zip code data for our partnership agreement. So I'll be sending more details out in email for that in early August, but just be on the lookout for that. And in August, we will kick off the topic of seizures and genetics. And we have a newsletter that'll be coming out in August for you. And we're working on our webinar, which will be in September with a neurologist from Utah that will be speaking on seizures and genetics. So I'll get some dates, the dates out to you soon here, so you can mark your calendar for that. And with that, I'm really, really pleased to introduce you all to our two family guests that we have today. We have Tracy Keller from Colorado, and we have Kayla McWain from Wyoming. And they are here, both moms that have experienced newborn screening firsthand, and they're here to share their stories today with you all. What we usually do for this format is let each of them talk for 15-20 minutes each, and then open the floor to questions. So if you do have any questions and you want to make sure not to forget them, feel free to jot them down on a piece of paper or put them in the chat. And then I'll moderate the questions at the end. But feel free to keep those questions in mind as they're sharing their stories. So Tracy's going to go first. So I'm going to stop sharing so you can see her full screen, and I'm going to spotlight you, Tracy, so that you're on the screen for everyone, so they know you're speaking. There you go. So I'll turn it over to you, and then just let me know when we're ready for Kayla to talk.
Okay. All right. You can hear me?
I can, loud and clear.
Perfect. All right. I would like to first thank you for inviting me to share our experience with the Colorado Newborn Screen Program. We are definitely not the typical patient that the test was intended to catch, because it was very confusing from the very start, but in the end, it did end up saving her life. And so it was 100% a success, and we could not be more thankful for the work that's constantly being done to improve the newborn screen process. I am so sorry, I'm having a problem with the camera. So we live in Grand Junction, Colorado, which is right at the Colorado-Utah border. So it's considered a rural area, especially for genetics care, because we're 4.5 hours from both Salt Lake City and Denver. My husband and I both have medical backgrounds. I worked in the NICU and PICU as a nurse while he was going through med school and the whole bit. And now he's a practicing anesthesiologist. So we both knew a little bit about the newborn screen, but it was more like the late 90s, early 2000s when we called it the PKU test. And we also knew that hypothyroidism was on there. And as a nurse, my experience was that if you didn't completely fill the 5 little dots, you got the dreaded letter from the state saying you needed to redo it. So beyond that, we really didn't know that much about it. It was just kind of a discharge formality. So what I learned later is that those 5 little dots are screening for 50 plus disorders, depending on what state you live in. Lexi was our 5th child. We have 4 biological children, and then 11 years later adopted Lexi as a newborn. She was born in 2012 as a full-term healthy newborn with no red flags other than a lot of social issues, but medically looked great. We thought we were really in the clear. So at 12 days old, we inadvertently found that she was having major oxygen problems. So her SATs were in the 50s and 60s with no reason. She had no respiratory issues and no cardiac issues that they could find at the hospital. And she wasn't gaining weight. So right off the bat, there was this big question mark of why would a healthy baby have such odd numbers when she seemingly looks perfect? So we discharged on oxygen and hoped it was just random bad luck, high altitude, maybe some reflux. And we just kind of went from there. So we had a lot of follow-up visits with the cardiology and our primary care. We were in a small family practice clinic at the time because she seemed healthy. And so we had lots of weight checks. And while we were at one of the weight checks, the very last one where it seemed like everything was resolved, the medical assistant came out and got me as we were leaving and said, "Hey, this came for you." And it was a letter in an envelope that was sealed. So we were, at that point, I was just kind of tired with follow-up appointments and really just done with all things medical. So I stuck the envelope in my bag and I went to a girlfriend's house for lunch. So I didn't know, there was no context to it, nothing that seemed urgent whatsoever. So I was sitting at her house when I opened up the letter, and it was the sheet that's given to us by the genetics, either the genetics department or the lab, that says your child is flagged for a fatty acid oxidation disorder called carnitine uptake defect, which my husband and I, neither one of us had ever heard of. And it went on to list keep all the scariest things of what happens if it goes undetected, which is coma and death if they don't eat, and the symptoms to look for, one of them being vomiting. So she was very refluxy from the very beginning, and I wondered if that was something that was going to put her at risk. And so emotionally it was odd because it was just one more thing in this, kind of a very odd first 12 days. So I called, there was a number at the bottom of the sheet that had a 1-800 number for the children's genetics department, and it said, call immediately if your child has any of the following symptoms. So I did call the on-call person, and they were great. They immediately got me in touch with the staff geneticist, and this was late in the afternoon by the time I read the letter. And she got on the phone and she was able to pull up, she had, kind of asked, I told her I have this letter, I've got a baby that vomits all the time, but it's reflux. And what do we do? And so she was able to pull up the exact number for what flagged on the newborn screen and said it was a borderline number and that reflux was fine and shouldn't put her at risk. So we thought, okay, great, we're in the clear. So the second part of the letter says that you repeat the labs that you flagged for, because the screen is just a screen. And those labs are then sent to ARUP in Salt Lake City for the more confirmatory testing. And so it did show that her numbers were improving a little bit, but they were not in normal range. And so being in Grand Junction, it is not convenient to have healthcare in Denver. We either have to spend 2 days driving because we have to go up over the passes, or we get on a plane, which is what we usually do. And so if I have to get on a plane, I decided to go back to the hospital system where I worked at, which was Indianapolis, because our geneticist there was also a neonatologist that I had worked with for years. So I contacted him and said, hey, I've got this, newborn screen. What do we do? And so he suggested that given the weird oxygen issue that had just happened, and now we've got this newborn screen, he wanted to see her in person, even though the numbers were increasing. So we flew out to Indianapolis, and, the numbers were even better than the second, the next set of numbers were even better, he said, but he said she did not look exactly normal. So he said, I don't know what it is, but there's something there. I just need more clues to figure out what it is. So for 11 years and counting, we have been collecting clues. The first year was crazy. We had frequent feedings and she had extremely low blood sugars that we knew about, because with the fatty acid oxidation disorders, the big problem is hypoglycemia. And so we knew to watch out for it. So they kind of told us if she was, acting anything other than totally normal, to just check her blood sugars. And so they were low, but not, nothing we couldn't get ourselves out of in a way. So we were kind of all high-fiving, thinking here we got the letter that said she's probably going to die any minute. And we did great job the first year. So we thought we were in the clear. But then we went on vacation at 15 months old and she had a hypoglycemic event that I couldn't get her out of. She had been kind of getting less active, stopped walking, but she was neurologically alert. So I just thought, okay, maybe she's tired. It was hot. You kind of make up all of the different reasons for why she would seem like she was not doing well. So I called the geneticist and he said to double the carnitine. We were treated at that point, going backwards, we were treated that way at that point for a secondary carnitine deficiency. So she was put on carnitine, but because her numbers were in double digits, it pretty much ruled out primary carnitine deficiency, which is what she had tested positive for on the newborn screen. So he said to double it and see if that helped. And then right before we put her to bed that night, she vomited once. So I tested her blood sugar and it was below 40. And so we tried to feed her again and I could not get her out of the 40s. It was like sitting between low and 42. So I called again and they said, take her to the local emergency room, which I thought was completely overkill because she seemed pretty well for a kid, just low blood sugars. We got to Oakland Children's Hospital on a Saturday night, which could not have been busier. They had 2 waiting rooms and it was spilling into the parking lot. So I figured I'd be there for about 10 hours before my seemingly healthy kid ever got seen. When I got to the desk, though, they asked what we were there for. I said, we have low blood sugar and she had failed the newborn screen, but we thought it was a false positive. So because of that, I think it was because the newborn screen immediately triggers inborn error of metabolism to all of the triage people. We never waited. We got immediately taken back. And the first thing, the resident popped his head in and said, I've got staff coming down right now. So clearly they knew stuff that I didn't know. So the first thing that happened was the physician asking me where my protocol letter was. And I told him I didn't know what they were talking about, and then restated that it was a false positive. They said it looked like a metabolic crisis from a fatty acid oxidation disorder, but not to worry because they knew what to do because they were affiliated with Stanford, who runs their newborn screen program. And so at that point, her blood sugar, I believe, was 38 and her bicarb level was 11. So they treated her by the established fatty acid protocols and she stabilized very quickly. From that point on, she was treated as a fatty acid oxidation disorder, even without all of the typical confirmatory tests and DNA and everything. So it was definitely a shock. We were told at discharge that we may want to get educated a little bit because I very arrogantly, I'm so sorry about this camera. I worked in PICU. I always thought I will know a sick kid when I see one. And she did not look sick. Looking at pictures in hindsight, you could tell that she kind of had that blank stare to her, but at the time I didn't pick up on any of that. So we got discharged with, now wondering, well, carnitine uptake defect honestly would have been the best case scenario because now we actually don't know what it is. So we decided we wanted to go for just maybe the geneticist we had been speaking with was medical genetics, and maybe we needed to now jump over to someone that was more specialized in metabolics. So from other families, we heard that there was a specialist in Atlanta and a specialist at Washington, D.C., that I contacted both of them. And as you guys all know, getting into geneticists is not easy. But our presentation was, we just had a metabolic crisis, here's our labs, and here was our newborn screen. And so we ended up getting appointments within weeks with both of them. So I kept them both. Both of them said it does not look like a primary fatty acid oxidation disorder, but it was looking like it was something secondary to a different metabolic disorder, and presented very much like glycogen storage disease. So honestly, it was clear as mud. And we were given the option at that point to DNA test, but we knew she did not fit the clinical picture of any single disorder that was out there. And at that time, this was 11 years ago, the DNA was pretty early in all of this stuff. And every year, the mutation database keeps on growing. So we were also told that the longer we can wait, the more likely we were to get a hit and figure out exactly what it is. So we felt like we had a good grasp. The protocols for fatty acid oxidation were working perfectly. Everything was stable at that point. And so we just made the decision to put out small fires, and maybe she would outgrow this, or we just kind of see where it went. And so that's kind of where we ended up. Is even today, she's, if you name an organ system, I can tell you exactly what's wrong with it to date. She's one of those kids that if you go looking for problems, you are going to find problems. And so we really keep diagnostic tests at a bare minimum, because a lot of the stuff isn't related to what problem we're currently dealing with. And so it's been a very big balance trying to work with all of the different systems. But we do, in the context of the newborn screen, we have so many things to be thankful for. We are thankful that Colorado has a system that can get information to patients and providers quickly. So Lexi was born in Denver with a different last name and discharged to adoptive parents in Grand Junction, Colorado, which takes a bit of detective work once you get it flagged to figure out she was technically discharged to an adoption agency, who then has the information of where the parents landed. And then you've got to find that primary care clinic. And so I don't know how long it took for that letter to make its rounds, but it made it, which to me was kind of a miracle that they were able to do that. And it changed everything for us. We are thankful that for every stop in our 11-year plus journey, that physicians familiar with the newborn screen, that they are familiar and that they can catch, that they know that there's these metabolic things that don't have super obvious symptoms out there. In the months that followed the first metabolic crisis, it was the newborn screen and the abnormal labs that in a way gave us that fast pass to the top specialists. Everyone has always been very intrigued by her case because we have a lot of objective data. And so I always call it an unfair level of respect for the newborn screen process, because it's kind of the first clue with numbers that's not just my kid's puking a lot, my kid's not gaining weight. We can kind of rationalize all of those types of findings, but numbers seem to speak for themselves. And so, we got into these doctors within weeks, and without the failed newborn screen, it can be almost impossible to get into these same experts. And, there's wait lists that are 1 and 2 years long. So in an odd way, it felt like the newborn screen was the golden ticket to healthcare. And we are especially thankful for the newborn screen in the context of fatty acid oxidation disorders. I would consider it to be the most successful metabolic disorder on the newborn screen, and MCAD is it's like the poster child for newborn screening. So before MCAD was put on, by 2007, it was adopted everywhere in the United States. But before it was on the newborn screen, 25% of MCAD patients died when they got their first illness, and no one even knew there were problems. They just go to sleep and they don't wake up. So fast forwarding to today, once you can get past that newborn, it seems to be an exclusively breastfed baby that's at the highest risk in those first 5 days because they're fasting. But if you can get past that first 5 days, it is almost unheard of for any MCAD patient to die. And we're finding the same with VLCAD and LCHAD as well. So they certainly have, it's not necessarily, especially with the long chain ones, it's not a carefree life by any means, but the survival rates are just astounding for something as simple as don't let them fast. If I had 2 pieces of advice for primary care physicians that have a patient flagged for the newborn screen, it'd be to remember that you guys are their first and only source of information until the additional testing is completed. And it's not until the second level of testing is done and raise is abnormal again that you usually get contact with the geneticist as a one-on-one. The information, so what that means is that we get these letters or the name of the disorder, and of course you go to Google because that's where we get all of our information. And the information there, what isn't present on that website is that these statistics and this information is prior to newborn screening. So when you have a baby that comes in with a metabolic crisis, it's a lot different than a baby that flagged the newborn screen and they don't have any symptoms yet. All of the statistics are different. They may never have those problems, and especially the survival rates and everything are very different. It really did it. When you look at it, the first paragraph, it feels like a death sentence. So I think the staff, if they could explain to parents that the conditions were put on the newborn screening because the treatment will change the natural course and many go on to lead fairly normal lives, it puts parents more at ease while the process is playing out, because even a couple weeks to a parent who doesn't understand all this stuff and thought their newborn was healthy feels like forever. And the second piece of advice would be to encourage families to reach out to support groups specific to the disorder that they flagged for. Because the parents in that support group have almost always been caught by newborn screen, and they can walk those patients through. Carnitine uptake for that context is actually the best example, because we actually have a lot of moms that are getting caught as having carnitine uptake defect, and it's their babies that are flagging the newborn screen because they have their levels are close to 0. And so as all of the families who've gone through that process, it's much easier for us to say, oh yeah, don't worry, this is the normal process. Next, you're going to have this, next, you're going to have that. It takes a couple weeks, but they're on it. They're making sure the levels are normal or becoming normalized, so that all of those scary symptoms and outcomes aren't a possibility now that they're, they've been flagged. So it's, all I can say is that we were truly given a gift by the newborn screen. We certainly have our problems. The crisis did cause significant brain damage. But she, Lexi lives on the outside, a very normal life. And like I said, we put out small fires, and, school has probably been our biggest issue, but, she's here and she's thriving. So it's been very exciting for me to watch the successes of the newborn screen and to appreciate the changes that they're making as more data comes. So, everything from SCAD that's next in line to be removed from the newborn screen, to SMA type 1, which got put on Colorado's not too long ago, to see that these kids can now live beyond age 2, and then using the advancing technology to minimize the false negatives and false positives, which is affecting the VLCADs a lot. So being able to know that this is a carrier before you send the letter out changes those first few months for the parents. Once, if they're not getting a letter that says you might have it, and now that they already know that it's a carrier. So we are forever indebted to the newborn screen. And even though we to date don't know exactly what it caught, it, couldn't be anything less than successful. So I think that's all I've got, Christy.
Great. Thank you so much, Tracy, for sharing that journey, and that journey that continues. But the great news is that, as you said, Lexi is thriving, and that's the great news. And thank you for just sharing all the ups and downs that you went through as a parent, and the advice as well. We're going to hold any questions for Tracy till the end, so we can hear Kayla's story as well, and then we can ask them both some questions at the end. So Kayla, if you're, let me remove the spotlight on Tracy, and I'll spotlight you, Kayla, if you're ready to share your story.
I am ready.
There you are.
All right, cool. Christy, thanks for letting me do this again. I love sharing our story, and Tracy for sharing yours too. But like Christy said, my name is Kayla. We live in Wyoming, and we have 2 kids. Our first kid was born in 2018. No complications from delivery. They came in and said, okay, we're going to do the newborn screen. And in 2018, I think at that point we were still like, oh, the PKU test. But like Tracy said, a formality before discharge, nothing ever happens. His newborn screen came back normal. We did the repeat one at 2 weeks. It was normal. So that led us into, obviously having a second child, who was born in January of 2020. Again, pretty normal delivery, did the newborn screening before discharge, was discharged at 3 days post-op. I had a C-section. And on that 4th day, which was a Friday, we got a phone call from an on-call pediatrician's office, as our pediatrician was out of the office that Friday and not taking phone calls. And that phone call actually came from a nurse at the office, and it said, your son is positive for PKU and potentially a thyroid disorder. We need you to go back to the hospital immediately today, have more labs done, and essentially just wait. And wait to hear from us, wait to hear from genetics. They really didn't have sort of a clear plan for us. So we packed up on Friday, we went right in, got that test done. And I think I called Saturday to the on-call physician and said, hey, you made this sound pretty urgent. Am I going to get these results? And we actually didn't get those results until Monday. On that call with the nurse, she said, don't Google it. Don't Google it. And like Tracy said, Google doesn't show you, the positive outcomes and what can be, and that there is treatment out there and there's hope, and your child will be just fine if we can get them on treatment. So Monday, that phone call came, and 2 days later, we were driving 4.5 hours to Denver in the middle of a snowstorm at 5:30 in the morning. And in Wyoming, they just put like railroad things down, and they say, you cannot drive on this road, it's closed. And the interstate definitely should have been closed. But we were there at 9 days old, and we were educated, and we knew that day that everything would be okay. But we had to start metabolic formula for life and a low protein diet. But after our meeting with our genetics and metabolics team, we had a much clearer understanding of it, which was important, but that didn't come until 9 days of life. We didn't, like I said, get any real direction or support from that on-call physician. And I know for a fact, if that call would have come from our pediatrician specifically, he would have done a little bit of research, offered that comfort, offered that support. So that's one thing that I wish could have been different. But Children's Hospital, of course, we're at Colorado as well. They did reach out on that Monday, and they paid for our lodging. They set up all of our appointments. They got us down there safe, and, kind of took that burden of traveling off of our plate. But in that first 9 days of life, knowing what I knew on Google, I was told, just continue to breastfeed your child. It's the only thing you can do, or, if you're formula feeding, it's the only thing you can do. They'll be okay. So I continued to breastfeed. But we really didn't talk about sort of the results or what was happening or kind of how we felt. We thought maybe it was going to be nothing at all. And And of course, at 9 Days of Life, like I said, we were down in Denver. We stayed there for probably 3 days and had to do a complete washout. So that meant I couldn't breastfeed him at all. He was on metabolic formula exclusively. And then we started slowly introducing breast milk back in. He is a very classical form of PKU. So his breast milk had to be measured down to the ounce every day. And of course, he continues now at 3.5 years old to be on metabolic formula and a low protein diet, and he is perfectly healthy and thriving. A treatment range for a child with PKU is 2 to 6, and his number at birth was 28, which means that phenylalanine was building up in his body and his bloodstream and crossing the blood-brain barrier, and if left untreated, would start to cause significant damage pretty quickly. So it's crucial to keeping those kind of numbers within range. Like I said, he's 3.5. We have been very fortunate to have some financial support in paying for his metabolic formula and low protein medical foods. Our insurance does help cover the formula, but they do not cover the low protein foods. In fact, 98% of insurance plans won't cover the low protein medical foods, despite them being medically necessary and proven to be the only effective treatment for PKU is diet for life. There's a few therapeutics on the market and lots of research into more of them, including a cure. And I think a lot of this research and what's happening in the PKU and for the PKU community has to do with the fact that we have a patient registry. A few things I wish would have been different in sort of our journey to get here. Like I said, I wish our pediatrician would have made that phone call to us, despite him not being on call. Wish there was really more education around newborn screening from your pediatrician and even from your OBGYN. I took all of the birthing classes that were offered at our local hospital, and nobody really talked about it. So I wish there was a bit more education on newborn screening, what it is, and what could possibly come of that. To mention, his thyroid screen came back negative on that repeat. So we are just dealing with PKU. It would have been nice, like I said, too, from that on-call physician to get a little better understanding or support or knowledge of what the next steps were, how long we were going to wait, that everything was going to be okay. But all she really said is, we don't know. We've never really dealt with this, but don't go to Google. It would have been nice to say, and the metabolic physician is going to call you from Denver and reassure you for the weekend. That would have been great. Results like this are life altering and have a huge impact. So I think having that support early on would have been great. When we got connected and down to the metabolic providers, and one thing I'm fighting for now with the National PKU Alliance is we need to get the clinics resources that say, here's the National PKU Alliance, here's the National Organization of Rare Disorders, they have a patient assistance program, here is this organization. When you're ready, this is what they offer to you. I had to kind of find all those things on myself by, kind of going to Google, and being that I have a medical background, I kind of understand these things more and can kind of read through different organizations or understand, I guess, a little bit better. And there are families that can't do that, won't do that, don't understand how to do that, are drowning in PKU. So there's families that don't know about, National PKU Alliance until their baby's 1. And that's the hugest, the biggest support for this community. So I will say he was born in January 2020, and a lot has changed for this community in that 3.5 years, which is really, really, really exciting. So thank you for letting me share. I'm happy to answer any and all questions.
Thank you so much, Kayla, for sharing your story. This is my second time hearing it, but I continue to learn more as you give such great advice on what you needed looking backwards and what other families could really use in the moment. So thank you for sharing that. With that, we have some great time now, about 30 minutes or to at least 25 minutes, that we can do some questions. And we have a great audience on here today. I see Fleur and Gerardo and Meredith have joined. And so let's just open the floor for questions. It's very informal here. We are just in a meeting, so you can unmute your line. I'm going to remove the spotlight here from from Kayla, so you can see everybody on the screen there. But does anyone have any questions for either Tracy or Kayla from their stories that you'd like to ask them? Don't be shy.
I just want to comment that I think I really do appreciate when families share their story and bring an awareness that is definitely needed. I think whenever we have a parent share their personal story, their lived experience, we always get a lot of positive feedback from the community saying this is what we need more of. So thank you for taking the time and being vulnerable and sharing your perspective.
Thank you, Floor. I say the same thing. Yes, thank you guys so much for sharing. I will ask you both one question because I know you both share this passion. You both have mentioned advocacy organizations, and I know you both are very active in the advocacy organizations. So can you speak a little bit, both of you, from your different perspectives and different advocacy organizations about what you see now offering support to other families as to, you've highlighted it a little bit as to what are the first things that families need in that moment of receiving a result? What are you, and maybe share too kind of what that support that you all are involved with looks like. I know, Tracy, you're very involved in a Facebook group, probably answering some questions. Kayla, I don't know if you can maybe talk about the mechanism and what that looks like in today's world for support for families through support organizations.
Yeah, so unlike the PKU organization, a lot of the disorders seem to have very well organized, kind of an organization that's taken the lead and is going to be that place, the go-to place for information and for contacts and resources. And I will tell you that fatty acid oxidation has none, which is weird because MCAD is very common. Like it's like 1 in 15,000, I think. It's not that uncommon. A lot of it is political. There's been one woman who's kind of had the reins on it since her son is now in his 30s, and Mito Action has tried to make it more of an organization, but it's having some problems. So for fatty acid oxidation, it is largely Facebook group, and which can be good, but it's also not so good. I worry that everything about Lexi's newborn screen-ish, journey has been atypical because, one, the just confusion around it, but also because I see it from the provider perspective and the parent perspective, and the amount of misinformation that goes around these support groups is just, it's crazy. So it would be, I really wish at some point, I think there might be an organization where it's a lot more factual. I've kind of taken this role as, people look to me as the one that has the more objective information. And I've got kind of on speed dial, 2 of the lead researchers that do and they can, because they can't talk to a family directly that's not their patient, I've become the middleman. So I talk to the families as just parent to parent. And if it's something that I don't know off the top of my head and I can't push, published data, I'm all about published research and established protocols and not the anecdotal stuff that seems to be going around that just causes more problems. And so when I get a really complicated case, I can contact the researcher and say, hey, have you seen any articles specific to this? And then I will give them to the family to have them send to their, to talk over with their specific team. So I would say my role in advocacy has been quite different. I was even on a conference call with an anesthesia group from Washington and Stanford. Seattle and Stanford are trying to establish protocols for fatty acid oxidation, pre-op and perioperative. And so I was even able to give them all of the, anesthesia research that's been done and the latest stuff, because even they don't have one organization to turn to. So, when you get kids that fail newborn screens that have a solid organization, getting them quickly over to those, and then a lot of times they have the official organization, but then they also have a parent support group arm of it. The combination is so helpful because you can read stuff, but you can't ask a journal article a specific question about your child. And is it, a lot of it is, what's the difference between reflux and vomiting? And to a brand new parent, Lexi was the fifth to two medical parents. So for us, it was easy. But, all of that stuff is such new territory that I think the combination of resources is huge. And so I've just been trying to bridge the gap between the parent groups and what to do when we don't have an organization for it. And so I'm sure Kayla can speak to what it's like to have a real organization.
Thank you, Tracy. I think it's a great you're comparing and contrasting a newer disorder to a disorder that really paved the way for newborn screening with PKU. So yeah, go ahead, Kayla.
Yeah. Tracy, that must be kind of exhausting to kind of take that lead on. I do sort of take that lead on in my advocacy work as well. And it can cause burnout real quick. So good for you. So the National PKU Alliance is kind of our main organization, or is our main organization. They were established in like 2007, 2008. And from the National PKU Alliance and funding, and this really is a community. The community is funding sort of all this research and feeding it to the organization to give to scientists or researchers. But since 2008, there have been 2 approved medications on the market that National PKU Alliance played a role in kind of helping provide that research, the patient registry, the money for that research. My sort of roles that I play with the National PKU Alliance is I'm on the advocacy committee. I don't feel like in 2020, when my son was born, that there was as much support. Everything went virtual in January 2020 when the pandemic hit. So we didn't get to be seen in clinics. We didn't get to have our group visits with all the other PKU patients in the clinic. And we still haven't. So a lot of advocacy and support is online, and I didn't have that support starting out. That's a whole nother topic for another day, really. But I think not having that support made it a lot of it harder for us to kind of make it to a year old, figuring this out on our own. So I'm pretty passionate about making sure that family answer. We talk to them a lot, but they don't kind of have the time to sit down and sort of go through like really how you need to start feeding your child. But on the advocacy committee, we fight for a federal bill that's been around for 13 years that would basically require all insurance plans to provide some sort of coverage for these low protein foods and formulas, which obviously has been around for 13 years. So I've kind of turned inward to the state to see if there's something we can change at the state level. And I'm also just moving into the state. I assumed a genetics navigator role for the state of Wyoming through Mountain States, because I really want to know what other struggles people within the state of Wyoming are facing, whether it's PKU or an entirely different rare disease. We're super fortunate to be diagnosed at birth. So our journey is a little bit different than someone that waited 8 years for their diagnosis. And that's an area I would like to know more about. So the advocacy committee, I also just joined the mentor program at the National PKU Alliance. So any parent that may come to the National PKU Alliance and need support may get connected with me. I'm very passionate about people understanding their insurance plans and what sort of financial support they have available to them. So that's another piece I'm constantly advocating for. I'm on social media, on Instagram mostly, and my page is pretty much dedicated to PKU and supporting families. And we have Facebook groups. And, when my child was born, I'd go to the Facebook groups and I couldn't look at them because I was like, this isn't helpful. This isn't making me feel better about kind of our outcome. And now that we're 3.5 years old, I'm in there now supporting those families that are coming after us. And there was one line that was told to me really early on is, it'll get better. It'll be okay. It'll get better. And you don't want to hear that when your baby's, 9 days old, 3 months old, but it truly, really does. So very involved with the National PKU Alliance on their volunteers committee as well. And then I also do a little bit of work with NORD as an ambassador as well. So involved in a lot of different little areas and still trying to find which one fits me the best. But I can tell you that being in advocacy and sharing our story and fighting for better coverage for PKU and even a cure is exactly what I want to be doing. So
thank you both for sharing that perspective. Tracy, I just want to make sure before I put the link in the chat is to get in the Facebook group that you help out with. Is that through the fatty acid oxidation group where you fill out the form and then you get added to that? Is that
I think it's FOD.
Is it Deb Gould's
Deb
page? Okay, I'll paste that here in a second.
I would imagine MCAD probably has their own. I know LCHAD. I'm most active with LCHAD.
Okay.
Just because that's the one that, Lexi's got an technically unspecified very long chain fatty acid is what they're calling it. And that's the one I'm the most well-versed in. But yeah, that FOD one is the main one. And from there, they kind of will redirect you to your specific group.
Okay. So just for everyone that's on the call, and I'll post these whenever I post the recording too. I did put a couple links in the chat to the National PKU Alliance. Kayla had an article that was on the Today Show's page. So I linked to her article there as well. And then I also linked to the ACT sheets. Hopefully some of you have seen these in the newsletter. We highlighted these in the newsletter, and in the webinar that Dr. Mattern did for us in May, he highlighted these as well. So in someone's story, I think it was, both of you, this letter of scary things and what does a pediatrician say? These ACT sheets are actually algorithms for every single newborn screening condition that you could receive a letter for in your practice. And so they are literally next steps of what to do, and talk about the testing and what it was actually tested in the lab. So I just want to make sure you all have that link for these ACT sheets, because it really can be, if you get a letter on a Friday afternoon and you have never heard of the disorder that is on that page, this can be your go-to place without Googling it. You can go to and these are from the ACMG, the American College of Medical Genetics and Genomics. So just wanted to make sure everybody had that. All right. Any other questions that prompted?
There is. I'll give you one more, Christy. It's because where the transition is happening is that Mito Action is hoping to make Mito Action has a page. It's for Mito Action FAOD families. And so Mito Action is funding the family conference that starts tomorrow.
Okay.
And so I think that transition, I'm hoping that it's not a smooth transition currently, but I'm hoping if it becomes an eventual transition, that will turn it into a more well-organized organization.
Gotcha.
So that would.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that update as well. Does anyone else on the call have any more questions for Tracy and Kayla? Meredith, I see you unmuting. Go ahead, Meredith.
Yeah, I unmuted. Hi, I'm Meredith Williams. I'm a pediatrician in Albuquerque, and both Osana Abisholiva, my colleague, and I, we do the developmental rotation training for the residents here at our program. And first, just wanted to say thank you both for telling us your story and sharing. I wanted, I think, specifically to ask Kayla, but you as well, Tracy, what message would you like us to give the residents? When you say you wish that OBs or pediatricians talked more about what was happening with those circles in the heel prick. I know as a new mom, it was just hard for me to watch my baby get their heel pricked and those circles filled up. Even as a pediatrician, I was in tears myself watching those newborn metabolic screens. So I just wonder what more what's the right amount of this is what we're doing and this is what we're looking for, and without, kind of over worrying brand new parents who are already, feeling so protective of our newborns. What's the message you would like us to teach the residents about that engagement around newborn genetic screening? That was a long question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it makes sense though, because yeah, you don't want to like frighten a brand new mother
Mhm.
either, right? They're
Mhm.
upset that they're getting a blood draw to begin with, and then
Mhm.
here, this is what could possibly happen. But I think even just knowing what was being tested for would have been nice too. Just a sheet that says these are all the things we're testing for, and maybe just how common they happen. PKU happens 1 in 10 to 15,000 live births, and just letting them know, the likelihood that these come back positive is low, but we want to make sure that you understand that, your baby is perfectly healthy, looks perfectly healthy, but something could pop up in a couple of days. I think just having that basic understanding of the test, because I didn't get that. It was like, okay, we're going to take him now for his newborn screen, and we're going to take him for circumcision, and they just kind of like swoop him away. I think you may sign a consent to have these things done. But it's a very whirlwind experience at first. So I think just knowing what may have been on that test would have been very helpful. And just, explaining, this call will come in a couple of days. And I think it would be very crucial for that person providing the call, if it was positive, that they can provide some sort of support or have kind of educated themselves a little. That nurse was like, we don't know much about this. We don't really know anything. And but you need to go get another test. They could have done some potentially basic research to be like, this is what this disorder is. And, there is an organization for support out there. And like Tracy said, not every disorder has an organization, I guess. But it was very shocking to get that call that it was abnormal, because you just assume it's going to be normal.
Right.
So my perspective is a little bit different. Because I work with newborns and pregnant moms and everything, I treat the importance of the newborn screen now that I know how does a disorder get on there. And the reason it's on there is because we can do very doable actions to alter the course. And so the example I use all the time is, I get a lot of pushback from I think it's called a quad screen now, the prenatal thing that identifies genetic disorders. And people are like, well, I don't want to know because I'm going to go through with the pregnancy and it's not going to change anything. I said, well, it might change something. If you know that your baby is being born with a, hypoplastic left heart, do you want to be born in a rural hospital where you're now going to be potentially separated from your baby? So information doesn't mean you need to do anything, but it means that you are in the safest environment if things happen. And so I've actually talked to midwives before, because that's a group that we're losing newborn screen to, because they opt out of it, the home births and stuff like that. And it is and I just explained to them, the odds of it being positive are very rare, but if it is, it's possible to now identify it before the first symptom, which is seizures and brain damage a lot of times. And so when I put it into the context of being able to identify something before the permanent brain damage happens, all of a sudden people are a little bit more willing to have that heel prick test. And especially when you see the statistics, yes, it's 1 in 50,000 for some of these, but if you're the one and you didn't do it until your baby, now we know because your baby is not meeting milestones, and all you knew is that had you done a special formula at day 1, that's a guilt I don't think most parents would ever be able to live with. So I think it's making it real that yes, this is rare, but again, MCAT is just such a great poster child. It's not even special formula. It is just not letting them sleep more than 4 hours, something so simple. And so for residents, I think that's something that's easy to understand. You've got, just this little simple thing and people who are instantly taking it seriously. And that change happens overnight. 1 minute they had this formula and tomorrow they have this new formula. It's, it's something that's so simple. So I would say that that's the message, just that information is power.
Mhm.
And there's
Tracy, I like how you said that.
there's no downside to the newborn screen.
Mhm.
Right.
And like you said, the screen is on there because there's been some research done, and there's, something you can do to help prevent or treat that disorder on the
Right,
newborn
because
screen.
there
And
are a
leaving it,
lot of diseases that they can detect, but there's no treatment yet. So it doesn't make it on the newborn screen because they can't do anything
right.
about it. And so I think it's an important distinguish.
No, that's really, really helpful. Thank you.
I wanted to ask you, Tracy and Kayla, do you have to choose between a limited amount of conditions testing in the newborn screening, do you get to choose between like expanded one, or is the same one for
I
everyone?
think it varies greatly from state to state.
Mhm.
So a state like Minnesota, if it's available, it seems like it's been funded. And then there's other states, I think Arizona might be one of the worst ones, as far as there's 63 available and they're only doing almost the bare minimum. And so I think that might be another, where you're talking about educating the maybe OBGYN, when you're in a state that's not testing for all of them, letting them know that there is an extended newborn screen option, but the families have to pay for it. I think it's like $12. It's really cheap, but it is an add-on because it's not state funded. And again, that might be a great opportunity at that point to say, here's the ones being tested. Here are the newer ones. Again, same thing. Low odds of having it, but you get a good benefit of treatment if anything comes out. So, yeah, I think Christy is at baby's first test that has you can go state by state. So you can actually look at your state and see it's testing for 37 things. Then I haven't looked at it in a couple of years, but Minnesota had been the gold standard, and you can usually compare how many are missing on your states compared to what Minnesota's doing. The genetics department for your state should know how to get the extra one ordered. But yeah,
There are lots of people out there advocating and fighting for different things to be added to their state newborn screen, but that's up to the state at the end of the day to add those things on or not.
I'm just going to point everybody to, if you missed it, for anyone that's on from our Time for Genetics clinics, I posted the webinar that was done in May by Dr. Dietrich Mattern. And that is, he went over 60 years of newborn screening in 60 minutes. And so I don't know if most of you know that, but the PKU disorder that Kayla has been talking about today is celebrating its 60th anniversary of being a newborn screen this year. And so he basically takes the history from newborn screening from PKU all the way forward and talks about the differences state by state and highlights Krabbe disease as an example of a condition that's not on the newborn screen, but people are advocating for. So I highly recommend. I think it would be great for the residents, Meredith, maybe as well, because it's such a compact webinar of really the whole history, and he hits on some of the high points of what pediatricians need to know about newborn screening. So that's linked and recorded, and CME is available for that for MDs, nurses, physicians assistants, nurse practitioners, and pharmacists. So with that, we just have 2 minutes left. Are there any other burning questions before we sign off? If not, I just want to thank Kayla and Tracy again so much for being so transparent, sharing your family stories, and just giving us advice, right? Just giving us an insight into how we can do better. And like you guys said, information is powerful, and so when you know better, you can do better. So thanks for that. And thank you all for attending today. And I will send up a follow-up with some of the links as well as the recording. So if you want to share it with anyone in your office or any other your colleagues, you're welcome to.
Thanks.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining
Bye,
today.
Tracy.
Bye.
Bye, Christy.
Bye, Tracy. Bye, Kayla. See ya.